with each of us tonight. And as I was looking through, the first few verses, verses 1 through to 6, tell us of an omniscient God. Now, these are some big words, words I'm sure you'll have heard before, and hopefully I've got the meanings right. An omniscient God, that is a God who knows all. Our God knows all. Verses 1 to 6, O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. You hem me in behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. You know, some of you, most of you, you know me reasonably well. You know, I've been coming here for a lot of years. A lot of you have been coming for a lot of years. Some of you may know me less well. Mum and Dad and Angela and our Richard who's at home, they know me fairly well. Mary, my wife, well, she knows me quite well as well. You'll be glad to hear. We've been somewhere, well, in about 3 or 4 weeks, it'll be 20 years since we first started courting and 15 years married. So I know Mary fairly well, and she knows me fairly well after that time. For example, I know, just walking in the house and first glance at my wife, I know that I have done something wrong. Not all the time, but fairly regularly. I know just by looking. I know if she's not feeling well. I know if there's something bothering her. I may not know exactly what that thing is, but I know just by looking at her that there's something bothering her. But even better than we know each other, even better than we know our husbands and wives, God knows us. Even better than that. Even better. See, God knows all about each of us, whether we like that or not. He knows all about us. How does that make you feel? That's the question this evening. How does it make you feel to know that God knows all about you? Now, for many, many years, those who know me well know that going to the dentist, it's not that I don't like it. The issue is that I don't like brushing my teeth because it's just such a waste of time. And so for years I never brushed my teeth. But I managed to convince my dentist that I was really good at brushing my teeth because I brushed them really well just before I went. But it wasn't long before I could no longer hide that from the dentist. It wasn't long before there was problems. It wasn't long before the dentist realised what I was like. The dentist said to me one day, if you don't brush your teeth, this was about 2 years ago, the dentist said, if you don't brush your teeth, you'll never get a girlfriend. You'll never get a girlfriend if you don't brush your teeth. I said, well, I don't need one, thankfully. I'm married and I've been for 13 years. The point I'm making is that God knows us really well. We might think we can hide things from God, but we can't. We can hide things from each other, but we can't hide things from God. Now, for many years, that used to scare me when I was young, and I was told that God knew all about me, because I knew what I was like. I knew the wrong things that I'd done. I knew the times when I made a mess of things, the times when in secret I did things that would displease him. And that used to make me scared almost of God. I was nervous. But as I've got older, I've realised that that's a great thing that God knows it all. Because he knows it, but yet he still loves us. He loves us even though he knows it. Even though he knows what we like, he loves us. And that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. So it doesn't need to make us feel fearful of God. We can be thankful that he does know and still loves us. In verse 2, it says, you know when I sit and when I rise. Whatever we're doing, wherever we've been, every time we get up, every time we sit down, God knows. He knows those of us who get up and go out for runs. He knows those of us who maybe don't get up and go for runs so often. He knows all about us. The next section says, you perceive my thoughts from afar. Before we've even thought it, God knows. That thing that's maybe going to worry you, That thing that's making you nervous, God knew about it before you even started worrying about it. God knew that that was going to concern you. God cares about each of us. Verse 3, it says, you discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. He sees all that we do. Verse 4 says, before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. Before we even speak, God knows what we're going to say. And I was reminded when I looked at that verse, recently we've been doing, I think it was in our home groups, and one of the verses was telling us that out of our hearts, our mouth speaks, reminding us of the importance of keeping our hearts full of the things of God. Because we learned, maybe even in Sunday school we were learning, our hearts are connected, our tongues are connected to our hearts, and what we store in our hearts is what comes out of our mouths. There's another verse that reminds us, doesn't it, that with our tongues we bless God, but then at other times we curse our fellow man. It's a reminder to all of us, isn't it, to guard our tongues. Then we come to verse 5. You hem me in behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. That, in a way, it can feel a little claustrophobic, can't it? As though God is completely surrounding us. But what a wonderful thing that is to know that in whatever situation we face, God is there, surrounding us and with us. It reminded me of the front page I wrote in the August magazine. Back then in July time, we were going through some difficult times at home, some of the more difficult times that we've had to face. And it felt sometimes like at every corner and at every turn, life was difficult. There was always things that were difficult around us. We were encircled, it felt like, by difficulty, by hard times. And life can sometimes feel like that, can't it? And I was reminded of some verses in 2 Kings and chapter 6, where Elisha is gone and he's in a village or a town called Dothan, and the king of Aram, I think it was, had surrounded him overnight because Elisha had been telling God's people all about what the king of Aram was doing. And he'd gone to kill Elisha. He'd realised that it was Elisha that was giving out his secrets. And he'd surrounded that place. And in the morning it says that Elisha's servant got up. And when he looked out, he could see that they were surrounded by their enemies. They were surrounded. And he went to Elisha and said, look, we are surrounded by our enemies. There is nowhere that we can go. And Elisha says to him, look, just open your eyes. Open your eyes. And he allows him to see that the chariots of God were encircling round. Were encircling round, that even in the midst of that difficulty and that situation that looked like they couldn't face it, God was there with them. He was with them. That's in 2 Kings chapter 6. Then in the next few verses, starting at verse 7 through to 12, we learn of a God who is omnipresent. Omnipresent. God is everywhere at all times, wherever and whatever we're doing. Where can I go from your spirit? It tells us. Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. So the question is, where can we go to be away from God's presence? And the simple answer is nowhere. Nowhere. Wherever we are, God can be with us. And then into verse 13, we read of God's omnipotence, how he's all-powerful. He has done and can do all things. He has created everything around us. We read that he created us. He created us. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. This tells of us as God's care for us. Right from the beginning of time, our days were numbered. Our days were numbered. Every life is important to God. Every life should be important to us. And when like I say, 4 or 5 weeks ago, when I was first looking at this psalm again, it was just at the time when our government was putting through the legislation for Northern Ireland on abortion rights. And how sad it was reading these verses and realising what God thinks of the unborn. He loves them, each one. Each one is important to him. And it saddened me. It saddened me. Thankfully, we come to a God who is all forgiving, a God who is able to forgive if we would just turn back to him. But it saddened me. I looked at some statistics, and last year in England and Wales, we reached a new height of just over 200,000 abortions in a single year. And that brought me to tears. Over 200,000. Our country is in need of realising that it needs God. Our country needs God, unlike it has in a long time. It saddens me when we destroy life so readily. So let's pray for our nation. It's sad, isn't it, when our country leaves young women feeling that their best option is an abortion. We need to be a much more caring people, a much more caring society. Verses 17 and 18, how precious to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. If you were to go on holiday and go down to the beach and was to pick up a handful of sand, as much sand as you can hold in your hand, it would be nothing in comparison to the beach. It would be nothing. But if you let those individual grains fall through your fingers, the Bible tells us that God thinks about us, loves us more than every single grain of sand. How many countless hundreds of thousands of grains of sand are there in one handful? Yet God thinks about us more than that. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. Such is God's great love for each one of us. Now, verses 19 to 22, we have a slightly different change in the psalm. The theme or the way it's heading changes. And here the psalmist David goes on to say how he hates those who are against God. If only you would slay the wicked, O God, it says in verse 19. And verse 22, I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. Now the Bible tells us that we should love all people. We should love all people. And I wonder maybe if David realised in the last couple of verses, verse 23 and 24, that maybe he'd made a mistake with being so harsh. Maybe he'd made a mistake because he says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. But one thing that's for certain is David is saying that he sides with God. He sides with God. He doesn't side with these people who are contrary to God's word. And that's an important lesson to us, isn't it? Whilst we love them, while we love all people, we love all people, but we're not to side with them. We're not to align ourselves with them. We're not to lower our standards from the standards of God. But in verses 23 and 24, the great challenge, as David asks, and can we ask? He says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. You see, David has realised at this point that he's not judge and jury. It's not for him to decide the fate of the wicked. But he's asking God to search him. Search me, O God, and know my heart. And we know that when the Bible talks of our hearts, it's not talking of a muscle that pumps blood around our bodies. It's talking of our very inmost being. What's in here? What's in here? Can we ask God to search me, to search you, to search each of us? And then it says, test me and know my anxious thoughts. Test me. We've recently too, haven't we, at Capernwray, been learning about testing and how God uses testing at times to help us to rely more on him. The Christian life isn't going to be easy. It's not going to be a plain sailing. There's going to be difficulties. But these difficulties, this testing, helps us to realise our need of God. It helps us to rely more fully on him. And then to lead me in the way everlasting. And that's what we have to do. We have to follow Jesus, haven't we? Follow. I would follow Jesus. We have to allow him to lead us through life and on to life everlasting. So as we close, are we willing to pray this prayer and ask these questions? Search me, test me, and lead me. Amen. And now as we come towards our sacrament, a group of us are going to sing a new song to you, certainly new to us.